Thank you for the invitation to come and talk about this. Again, like Chris, this is, for me, feels like a difficult talk to give because at least a third of the people in the audience know all of this stuff already. But it's a fun one to give, so you can indulge me with that. So for those who don't know, this little movie here is everything in Galaxy Zoo that was classified as a spiral, and it was made by one of the participants in our Kaggle competition. That's actually, I believe he's currently winning the Kaggle competition, but it's running for a little bit longer. I think we'll be hearing more about Kaggle later, so I'll just not talk about it. So Galaxy Zoo, obviously, was the first of the Zooniverse projects and has now been running for 6.5 years, which is kind of amazing to think about. This is my timeline of the many versions of Galaxy Zoo that we have run, which is one of the reasons why giving these talks like this, which is sort of an overview of all the science results from Galaxy Zoo, is getting increasingly complicated because we have multiple versions of Galaxy Zoo where we've done different things. So we started out in 2007, it's not a pointer, with the original Galaxy Zoo, which I'll talk about in a minute. That was obviously the amazing success that we all know about and inspired the Zooniverse and this fantastic area of citizen science. Also, because of the success of Galaxy Zoo, it became clear that the citizen scientists could do more complex tasks, and so we launched Galaxy Zoo 2, asking for more details about the galaxies. We've had some examples of smaller side projects. So there was a project where we showed galaxies that had been classified as having strong bars, and we invited people to draw on those, where the bar was, how long it was. So it was a much smaller project there, run using Google Sky, actually. And then we've had lots of different relaunches, so Galaxy Zoo Hubble, using public images from the Hubble Space Telescope. We relaunched in 2012 with the HST candles surveys and also some new imaging from the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. Another small project, Galaxy Zoo Quench, is still ongoing. This was an experiment in getting people more engaged and bringing them through the whole process. Still to see what the ultimate results of that project will be, but it's been quite an interesting experiment that's still ongoing. And then just back in October, we put a first infrared images into Galaxy Zoo. So we have images of all of the original galaxies, but from the UKIDS survey, UK Infrared Digital Sky Survey. And then Chris also mentioned, but we also, under sort of the Galaxy Zoo umbrella, is now Galaxy Zoo Radio, cross-matching what galaxies look like in radio and infrared, which I'm not really going to talk about, but is there sort of under our umbrella. So everyone here really is an astronomer, so I probably don't need to say too much about galaxies, but galaxies show this, this vast variety of different morphologies. So here's just a bunch of snapshots of some pretty galaxies from the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. Actually, I think a lot of these galaxies were galaxies that were examples that Hubble used in his original classification tree. The original Galaxy Zoo just took the broadest difference between these things, so wanting to ask the difference between spirals and ellipticals, which again looks like a ring galaxy on this projector. Interesting. It's very smooth on my screen. So that was the first set of questions we did. We did this for 1 million galaxies in the Sloan Digital Sky Survey main galaxy sample. But obviously, the spiral galaxies in particular show a lot more different structures. They can have bars or not, they can have different numbers of spiral arms, they can have rings, there can be all sorts of other morphological features in galaxies. So Galaxy Zoo 2 is where we got really complicated, and we had this very complex classification tree, which Stuart already mentioned, where if you started at the top, is there a pointer? Is that a pointer? No? Yeah. It is? That one.
There you go.
Right, sorry. I twisted my ankle 3.5 weeks ago. It's making me feel like an old lady, but I was just on a long flight, right? So it's kind of sore. So I'm just going to stand still and point. Right. So this complicated tree where we had everyone starting here at the top, and then for some galaxies, half of the users come down I think this is smooth and there's no features, and just answer a couple of questions, and half of them go down and answer all of these more complicated questions about what they see in the galaxy. So that's been definitely a challenge for classification. Galaxy Zoo Hubble is where the clumpy galaxies come in. These are galaxies at high redshift, so they don't show the same morphological features as nearby galaxies. So we have yet another branch of the tree in Galaxy Zoo Hubble, and we have redshift-dependent biases. So that is getting sort of another layer of complexity again on how we go from the clicks to classifications, which is not something I'm going to talk about because Stephen is following me, so I'm just going to ignore that mostly. What do we get, though, is we get very, very large morphological classification samples. So this is a slide that Kyle Willett put together, showing a comparison of the size of the largest expert classification or catalogues of morphologies for galaxies compared to Zoo 2. The area of the square is the size of the catalogue. This one was a graduate student in Canada, Priti Nair, sitting and classifying 14,000 galaxies by herself. Yeah.
And just for my understanding, when you ask the question how round something is, do you show pre-checked images and let them decide only in this, or do you let them measure it?
No, they just judge it by eye. The standard Galaxy Zoo is just by eye judgment.
But their answer is to click a button.
Yes.
They don't mark it out.
That's right. Yeah, they don't mark it out. The standard Galaxy Zoo, we're just answering questions. So we have run a couple of side projects where people mark stuff, and the radio one is doing marking. But yeah, original, we're just answering questions. Right, so Zoo 2, so this is the complex classifications, one of the largest automated catalogues of morphology that's out there, just for the machine learning style technique from Marcus Schwerter's company et al. 700,000 galaxies, but this is not as complicated of morphological classification as we get in Zoo 2. It's actually more comparable to the original Galaxy Zoo, which was 900,000, almost 1 million galaxies. It's actually about quite substantially larger than the screen. Because Galaxy Zoo has been running for some time, not only do we have all these different classifications to work with, also quite a lot of it is public, so you can access Galaxy Zoo data at www.data.galaxyzoo.org. We also have 2 versions of the catalogue served through the Sloan CastJobs server, because it's the Sloan morphologies of Sloan galaxies, which is currently public. And 2 data release papers. So Lint et al. 2011 was the original Galaxy Zoo data release paper, and Kyle Willett led the heroic effort to process the Galaxy Zoo 2 classifications and make that data public. That was published just last year. So we've actually, now I get to talk about the fun stuff, right? I get to talk about the publications and the science, and I would say, I think as a team, Galaxy Zoo, we're extremely proud of our publication record. So you're going to have to indulge me in sort of boasting about it for a few minutes. We have, this is the snapshot from just last week from the Zooniverse publications. So here we are, Galaxy Zoo, with 42 peer-reviewed papers. We're not going to stick at 42 for long, unfortunately, because we're all busy writing more papers, so maybe that's a good thing. Some of our papers have more than 100 citations, and this is one of those wordles of the kinds of things we talk about. But now we have these fun things like ADS labs, where you can sort of do different searches and play with what you like in the literature. So typically, science team papers have Galaxy Zoo in the title. I don't think we require that, but that's kind of what we've done in general. So pretty much a search on the title having Galaxy Zoo in will pull up all the team papers. And so this is what you get. These are the top 4 by number of citations, Galaxy Zoo papers in the astronomical literature. So I just thought I'd start with that. So obviously the original project description paper and the data release paper are quite up there, but in terms of science, these are our sort of most cited science papers so far, are all about the disentangling colour and morphology in galaxies. So I already had a conversation with someone over coffee about how not all red galaxies are ellipticals. So that was a good tie-in to this conversation. One of the most famous results, I would say, from Galaxy Zoo is that not all red galaxies are spirals and not all blue galaxies are... No, other way around. Not all red galaxies are ellipticals and not all blue galaxies are spirals. Here is a screenshot of an image that was actually used in a BBC article talking about red spiral galaxies as the missing link. Everyone loves that term in galaxy evolution. So here's a typical blue spiral, a typical red elliptical, looking like a ring galaxy, and this genuinely does have these arms. That's not a feature of the projector. This is a red galaxy, an optically red galaxy, which shows spiral arms. Here are two figures, one from each of the top cited papers on the disentangling of morphology and colour. So this one is from Ramin Skibber's work, where he's showing as a function of the optical colour of the galaxy, with blue on this side and red on this side, what the median and interquartile range of classification probabilities are from Galaxy Zoo. And so you can see for blue galaxies, they have a low median probability of being an elliptical and a high median probability of being a spiral. But the elliptical probability is not 0, and particularly the interquartile range. You do get elliptical galaxies with quite high spiral probabilities. And then over here on the red side of the population, the two are even closer together. So the median probability of an elliptical is higher than the median probability of a spiral, but you can't see the interquartile range for spirals, but there generally are quite a lot of red spirals. Here's a nice figure from Bamford et al. 2009. So this is before the famous, at least in extragalactic astronomy, Peng et al. Results disentangling density of mass and environment in terms of galaxy evolution. This is showing the same thing for red spirals. So this is a fraction of spiral galaxies that are red as a function of their distance from the nearest cluster. So in the cores of clusters on this side, and out in the field, way far away from clusters on this side. And the different lines are different masses of spiral galaxies. So you can see in clusters, pretty much all spiral galaxies are red, or not all red, but all of them have, all masses have a high probability of being red, whereas out here in the field, they split by mass. So the most massive spiral galaxies, even in the field, can be quite red, whereas lower mass spiral galaxies will be blue. Going back to just, again, looking at our papers in the ADS labs kind of way, it's not just the top cited ones. We keep going, we keep writing papers. We have 42 already published. We average between 7 and 10 a year for the last 5 years, which I think is pretty good. But not only are we writing papers, they're also getting cited. I hadn't seen this, I hadn't looked at this before doing this, but in 2013 there were almost 400 citations of Galaxy Zoo team papers in astronomical literature. So we're not just writing papers and being ignored, we're actually being cited by other astronomers.
Some of those people will have read the papers as well.
Well, so look at you're going to see the next thing I think is great. So I decided I wouldn't just search for Galaxy Zoo in the title, but Galaxy Zoo full text search. ADS Labs lets you do it. So if you do that, the top 3 cited papers which mention Galaxy Zoo since 2007, the top 2 of them are not science team papers. It's a Sloan data release paper. Again, I said we released Galaxy Zoo as part of this Sloan data release, and also an LSST paper. But also look at this. This is the number of mentions. So in 2013, almost 100 papers mentioned Galaxy Zoo, but 400 cited Galaxy Zoo science team papers. So they're citing us without mentioning the fact that it's Galaxy Zoo, which actually I think is really positive. They're citing the science, not the project. So I think that's pretty cool. And I'll move on now from boasting about our publication record and tell you about some of the results that we have. And I thought a bit about how to do this, and I thought to myself, how should I do this? Because, you know, I can't just review 42 papers in well, I guess the remaining 10 minutes that I have, or 15 minutes that I have. I thought maybe the best way to do it was to think about the different ways that we've used Galaxy Zoo to get science. And I kind of could categorize the papers into 3 different sort of themes. So my first theme was just using classification thresholds to define samples. And I think this is the easiest one for sort of standard astronomers to understand. We give each galaxy a morphology based on the number of people who said they saw a certain feature in it. So we just assign a threshold. But you don't just have to do it that way. You could also use the classification probabilities or the vote fractions as a weighting for statistical methods. So we have several examples of doing it that way. Arguably, that's the way to get the full statistical power out of the project, but sometimes it's slightly harder for people to understand, I think. And then, of course, there's the most famous results sometimes, or sort of the unexpected, or the forum and the talk science. So not using the full classifications, but using the interface to find unusual things. So I sort of already said this. Classification thresholds, I think, was sort of the first way of using the full classifications in Galaxy Zoo, and often I think will be the first thing people do. It's the method most like the previous ways people have done galaxy morphology, where each galaxy has an answer, or doesn't. So my first example of using this is actually our most recent Galaxy Zoo paper, so our most recently accepted paper from Kevin, where you can use thresholds in the classification probabilities, or the fraction of people who said they saw certain features, to separate the population. This is actually using Galaxy Zoo 1, so this is using the basic split between elliptical or early type and spiral galaxy. And so here we have the whole population put on a colour magnitude or a colour mass diagram. So this is a pretty standard tool in extragalactic astronomy. You've got the red sequence, which is sort of common knowledge, where you get the ellipticals, and the blue cloud here, where you get spirals, lower mass and bluer, higher mass and redder. Splitting this into things that have high probability, so more than 80% of the users said this was an early type or an elliptical galaxy. 20% of the sample is that, and you can see they're largely on the red sequence, as expected. Can take out the ones that are very confidently spiral. So again, 80% of the people roughly looking at it said there was a spiral. About a third of the population fall there, and see largely in the blue cloud, but with this big tail to the red sequence. But this is missing 45% of the galaxy population by doing it this way, right? This is splitting it into the two extremes, the areas where people agree the best. But if you do that, you can separate the populations really nicely, and you can find some really exciting things about them. And this was the main result from the paper. This is now a color plot instead of color magnitude, and we've sort of indicated on it this green valley region, so the sort of optically green, so not the bluest and not the reddest, but in the middle, split by their morphology, so the spirals are the blue contours and the ellipticals, or early types, are the orange contours, and you can see they kind of split in near UV minus U. And the reason that's interesting is that really recent star formation will make things blue in near UV minus U, but if there's a decline, they'll optically redden first, and then they'll redden in the near UV minus U. And so by seeing, so things that the morphologies are the same color in the optical, but split in this near UV minus U, so the UV colors, and that's telling you that the spiral galaxies, the green valley spiral galaxies, are quenching slowly, so they're turning off their star formation slowly. They're remaining blue in UV while they've gone red in optical, whereas the ellipticals go red in both really quickly, so they're shutting off all of their star formation really, really quickly. So that's our most recent result. You can also use classification thresholds to find the most obvious features, and I think the bars in spiral galaxies are one of the best examples of this. So this is work done by my student, Tom Melvin, which is just published, using Galaxy Zoo Hubble to identify bars in disk galaxies at high redshift. So here's two examples of very high redshift, so redshift 0.8, 0.9 galaxies from Hubble with very strong bars, and here are two at the same redshift without bars. And what we found was that this really strong decline in the bar fraction with redshift. So disk galaxies in the past at high redshift had many fewer bars than they do today, which is what you expect from the models, because the early universe is much more dynamically active, there's a lot more merging going on. You only form bars in very stable, well-established disks, and so this is just showing that the disk galaxies are becoming more stable and growing more mature over time, effectively.
Is that the fraction amount of bars within all galaxies or within spirals?
This is the fraction of bars within disk galaxies, within visually identified disk galaxies. And we cheated. So we didn't have to worry too much about redshift biases. We picked only the brightest disk galaxies. So this is basically a selection of things where you can tell it's a disk across the whole redshift range, and you can tell there's a bar across the whole redshift range. Yeah. Could get a much larger sample if you were more adventurous, but this was the easy way to get the obvious features out. Here's an example of using classification thresholds to find very rare objects, or fairly rare objects. So this is work by Brooke Simmons, and what she's done is plotted on something that we call the BPT diagram, which is an ionization ratio diagram, or only galaxies from Galaxy Zoo 2, where people have said very confidently they see either no bulge or a very small bulge. So the sum of the probability of no bulge plus just bulge was greater than 0.7 for these grey dots. You can't see the lines, which is a pity, but basically the point is anything up here must have an AGN dominating the ionization. So different ionization ratios. This is very hard. These are emission lines consistent with having been ionized by very hard radiation. So Brooke went and had a look herself at the very small number of things up in this top corner. And so here's an example of some of these things. The AGN itself contaminates the optical emission from these galaxies, so you get a bright point source in the center. So visual judgments about the size of the bulge are very difficult for these galaxies, but this was a way of identifying candidates of things with no bulges, but still with these AGN. Brooke went and looked at them all herself and also fitted light profiles to them to extract the point source, and identified 15 very good candidates of galaxies with absolutely no bulge, but very with actively growing black holes. So if you know about galaxy evolution, there's this black hole mass bulge mass relationship, And these are galaxies that lie way off that relationship. And you're not supposed to be able to have an actively growing black hole in the standard galaxy formation if you haven't got a big bulge. But yet these things do. So they're all offset. So they all have much higher, much more massive black holes than are expected for their bulge because they have no bulge. So that's a very neat result. But I have to move on because I want to talk about other ways of using the classifications, and I want to talk about using the classifications as probabilities in statistical methods. So this is the paper that I always try to talk about in every talk I give about galaxy zoo science and never quite manage to get to somehow. So today I put it in the middle. This is a statistical method looking at the correlation function between galaxies, so how they cluster on the sky. And so this is supposedly my demonstration of what a correlation function is. Basically what you do is you measure the distance between every pair of galaxies in your survey, and then you compare the distribution of those distances to what you expect for totally randomly distributed galaxies. And then you plot the ratio. So here, where this correlation function is above 1, things are more clustered than random. And you get this characteristic thing. The black is just every spiral galaxy, actually, in Galaxy Zoo 2. You get this characteristic distribution where on small scales things are more clustered, and on the very larger scales eventually you get out to the universe being homogeneous and randomly distributed. What Ramin Skibber's work is from 2012. What he did in this paper was not just calculate the straight number of pairs like this, distances like this, but weight them based on whether or not the galaxies had bars. And he used the bar classification probability as the weight. So say these were 2 galaxies in the sample. If this one and this one both had a very strong bar, this distance would be weighted very heavily. If neither of them had a bar, it's weighted as 0. Yes?
So you use the parent distance, redshift is ignored?
No, redshift is not ignored. It's projected distance and in slices, I think.
In distance slices?
Is it in slices?
I mean, what distance?
No, this is the It's projected distance, but it's not done in slices, right?
No, I think it's ignoring redshift.
It does ignore redshift, but this is all Sloan, so it's all relatively nearby. But that actually means the redshift should make more of a difference. I'd have to answer that later, I'm afraid. I don't remember. Nevertheless, it was done the same way for both, and we're going to take the ratio here, so it doesn't matter. So the blue squares here are the ones that are weighted by the bar classification probability. And here is just the ratio of them, and where this is above 1, things with bars are more clustered than things without bars. These are all disk galaxies. So this is showing that disk galaxies with bars on these scales are more clustered than disk galaxies without bars. Now typically, if I manage to explain this correctly to my cosmological colleagues, they get a bit scared about this, because this is saying the internal morphology of galaxies affects their clustering. So he's actually dependent. Oh dear. Yeah. Well, I knew it would be tricky.
And then we can take a quick question.
As is typical, I'm not going to get time to tell you all about all of this. But there's some really neat things where Ramin shuffled the bar probabilities based on, so basically taking slices of galaxies at a fixed color or at a fixed mass and shuffle the bar probabilities within them to see if this is just the fact that bars are more likely to be found in redder, more massive disk galaxies. And what we find is that actually can't account for all of it. So these 2 points here are above any of these lines. So even in red spirals, if they have a bar, they're likely to be slightly more strongly clustered on these scales than if they don't have a bar. So we have other examples of using the classification probabilities directly to look at galaxy evolution. So for example, this is star formation rate versus mass, color-coded by the bar probability again. And you can use this to disentangle different trends of bar probability with galaxy mass at different parts of the population. And with apologies to Kevin Castile, some really neat stuff looking at indications of interactions. I'm going to just skip over this. Because I have to mention the unexpected, the forum science, right? This is the most famous example of the unexpected coming out of Galaxy Zoo. Obviously, the discovery of Hani's Vulva, the 1 in a million object, literally, an AGN caught in the act of shutting off. But there's actually a lot more examples of this. There's the green peas, so rather compact galaxy. So this is a typical smooth galaxy at the same redshift of these 3. So sort of you can see it's optically red and rather more extended than these things, which look very, very green because their light actually is dominated by an emission line and are much smaller. So these may be analogues of high redshift star-forming galaxies, have been totally missed before we had Galaxy Zoo. And then even the more sort of mundane, I guess, in a sense, but this is, just a demonstration of the sheer size of the universe. These are galaxies that just happen to be along the same line of sight. They're not interacting at all. And using the forum, Bill Keel was able to put together the largest catalogue of these overlapping galaxies that exist. And you can try to model these to learn about the dust properties in galaxies, which sounds incredibly dull, but it's incredibly important because so much of what we know about the universe depends on our assumptions about the dust in galaxies. Right, and so that's the end, just ending the science.
Like a quick question. Okay.
This is more an observation than anything, but your ADS plots really show that we're still in the phase where we're ramping up in terms of getting the science out of Zoo 1, let alone the later projects. So I think with this whole enterprise of using the Galaxies of Citizen Science classifications in science papers is still in full swing.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think for many years to come, and we're certainly ramping up in the community use of the classifications. I mean, there's an increasing number of people using them as additional data on their Sloan galaxies. But I still meet my colleagues who are fussing around about trying to figure out the morphology, and I'm like, well, why don't you use Galaxy Zoo? It's public now. I'm like, oh. I don't know if you've had that experience, but yeah, so it's much more to come.
Anybody else? All right, thank Karen.